Hey guys, welcome to the shop. Today's Dum Dum's Guide to Machining is going to be on inspection techniques, a brief overview of how we measure perpendicularity or squareness, a brief overview on parallelism, and a couple of quick ways to check your dimensions. We can discuss using a planar gauge later. I don't think they're really relevant in an even semi-modern shop. This is a planar gauge. They're cool, they're fun, they're not really relevant. I'll do a very brief overview on just how to set height on that. That's the kind of tool where if you can't figure out how to use it, you don't need one. I can figure out how to use it and I still don't need one, so I'm not going to use it. There's two quick ways to do it. One requires gauge blocks, the other requires a depth micrometer. I'm using this surface gauge as a squareness comparator. And let me just grab out of my toolbox the scribe that normally sits in it. This is also a really good layout tool, so you can have a scribe to scribe the side of parts, or a scribe to scribe the top of parts. Absolutely nothing wrong with using it that way. I tend to, if I'm using layout, I will just use a semi-precision square like this that I'll check against a reference square or just a set of 1, 2, 3 blocks. These are Asian import off Amazon, actually. I think I bought the pair for 20 bucks. And they're both functionally identical. They're within a tenth of squareness, as far as I can tell, and actually better, which is, for the price, I think unbelievable. So we're getting a 1,000th reading here, and we're getting exactly 1,000th because that was my master side I set the gauge to, and we're getting like a 11 and a half, 10,000ths of an inch on this side. The repeatability with this setup and me using it on camera is only within a tenth. So if we split the difference off that, that's basically 7 millionths of an inch, or 700,000ths of an inch. Sorry, not millionths, guys. I misspoke. That's fantastic for a set of $20 gauge blocks. I really don't. I don't think you can go wrong for that price. And people also, I think this is one good thing, is people assume the only way to measure size precisely is with a micrometer, which is not even close to true. I'm going to measure it, and you can measure in a few different points on camera. And this is just an acquired skill, guys. You gotta develop it. And I would say we're good there. We are looking at the mic. We're 2/10 oversized in that corner. And we're 2/10 oversized in this corner. So it's like, if I wanted higher precision than that, I can set these up for higher precision than that. And micrometers are great tools. This is a set of Sher Tomiko. I do have a 0 to 6 set. These are fantastic. I bought them on eBay, new old stock. And they're great. So that's one way to do it. You don't even need one of these. You can actually go buy, this one's from McMaster-Carr, $20. I think this is Taiwan made. Just keep it clean. They scratch, but looks square to me, guys. You can hold it up to the light and look for gaps. There's a very slight air gap, or light gap on this in extremely strong light when you squint, but I'm calling it square. So that's a quick way to measure squareness. And alternatively, we can measure height using a set of gauge blocks. So we can check our calibration on this. And see, we're going to measure. We're assuming this is 100% flat. And one good thing to talk about if we're discussing high precision measurement is cosine error. So you want this, the test probe effectively, you want that to be as square to what you're measuring as humanly possible. So you don't want it at an angle like this, because you're going to have less of an error than more of an error than it really reads, or less of an error. I can never remember, so I know is just eyeball it and try to get as square as you possibly can be on the probe. But we're going to set ourselves to 1 inch using our dial test indicator. And we're going to verify that, sweep on, sweep off. See, this is not perfectly repeatable, guys. There's always an error. About 2/10. Or we're within 2/10. That's the limit of my repeatability. And we're going to sweep on. And we are reading this as 1/10,000th of an inch undersized in this corner, and bang on the rest of the way. Now, why could we get a different result with this than with a micrometer? Frankly, the most likely result is I did it wrong. This method of using an indicator on a surface plate is extremely precise. For when a micrometer just won't do, use a surface plate. And it could be that there is an error in the micrometer, and it could be because I did it by feel. Now, I do a lot of measurements by feel instead of using the ratchet. So using the ratchet, we're bang on dimension. We're perfect. So your feel is a source of error. Your rigidity in your setup is a source of error. And you have to think about it, is how precise do I need to be? Also, for storage of micrometers, don't have the anvils touching like this. They tend to corrode together. Always back them off a little bit. And use a good micrometer for really precision work. If I really have to work in 10,000ths of an inch, put it in a stand. Minimize the time you spend holding on to these, because holding on to this here, and I've demonstrated, my mom did not believe me that hanging on to this for a couple of minutes would change my dimension by about 0.5 of an inch. She couldn't believe that. It was just the degrees of precision was tough for her to understand. And that really does matter. In here, this is surface ground, so I think the last time I measured this, it was 7/10 oversized. I've been planning to lap this in as sort of a project, but I've never gotten around to it. Now, I wonder with a different micrometer what we're actually going to read. And I think let's do it on camera together. You know, we're definitely square there. What are we reading? We're very close to 250 thousandths. On the vernier scale, we're 3/10 oversized. So this is actually perfect for lapping. I think we can take 3/10 off a piece that small, lapping it together. Not today, but I think down the line. And, you know, lapping is a good technique. I have lapping plates. They're not handy, and I don't think they're super relevant to an inspection video. But kind of think about it, because there's certain techniques that are more precise than others. Like when you're grinding, you should be working in 10,000ths of an inch. You don't have to, but you can be. And, you know, cylinder squares are nice. It's nice to just butt your part up against it and look for a light gap. It's convenient, it's quick, it's not the most precise thing to do, but if you're trying to get within a couple thousandths, it's perfect. And I have this cylinder square squared to within 0.5 of an inch, which is perfectly adequate for most purposes. And I mean, for it being a little more than twice the height of this, for a shop-made tool made entirely on a lathe, there's nothing ground on this. I think that's good enough. How about that? In kind of a last sort of unconventional way to measure height, we can use what's called a depth micrometer. Now, you might be measuring to the bottom of a groove, for example, where you're pressing in a bearing that needs to be flush with the surface or a little below. So you'll need a way to measure to the bottom of that. And if you don't have gauge blocks, a depth micrometer is really nice, because I could just stick a gauge block in the bottom of that. Now, I don't like to spin this very far once it's in the hole. So we're getting, I would say that's 2 or 3 10,000ths oversized based on this micrometer reading. That's acceptable. Depth micrometers aren't the most precise thing in the world. The rods will deflect, so I don't really bother buying these graduated in 10,000ths of an inch, because I think you can eyeball 0.5 thousandths on these pretty reliably. And they're also kind of counterintuitive, because you just have to do a little bit more math on them, because they're 0 to 1 instead of 0 to 1. You read them right to left instead of left to right. So there's subtraction instead of addition, and that always tricks me up. I struggle with it, guys. Once you get used to doing things one way, it can be hard to adapt. And we're just going to check our calibration on this. And doesn't seem quite right. I feel like we should be closer than that. You see we're not the most repeatable thing. We're about 2/10 off again. So not the most repeatable tool. I have a more accurate Mitutoyo depth micrometer. That one just feels nicer and it's accurate enough. But a lot of your inspection can be done on a rule like this under good light and reasonable magnification. Reasonable magnification, I will work under 2 times magnification, especially if I'm grinding drill bits, for example. So that works really well for me. You use a drill gauge, I can see what's going on. I have an easier time with it. We're just going to clear off the surface plate quickly, because we're breaking out the planer gauge again. Just going to demonstrate that. And you guys can think about how that might be relevant if you're doing a bunch of setups, or you need to translate a very precise height off of a surface plate onto a machine. These were historically used for metal planers. Now, off camera, I am cleaning this off, and I do not want to scratch the top of my surface plate. Surface plates are one of those things where if you think they're clean enough, they're not. You have to know they're clean enough. So I set this pretty close. We're just going to dial you down. Unlock it, because I might have gotten a little aggressive locking this guy earlier. It does jump a little bit. I have never had a really easy time setting one of these. I know other people do, but I'm not one of those people. Your range of adjustment on these is just irritatingly small. Well, I think you get the idea. It's basically just you use this thumb screw here as your fine adjust. And give myself the fighting chance I need to do this on camera. All right, so we're set at 1 inch there. We're going to check on a gauge block and make sure this is accurate. Not even close. I think we knocked this out by just fiddle farting around with the, yeah, we did. And that's the thing, it's really easy to move stuff 1/1000th or 2 of an inch. So now we're on within a couple of tenths. I just got to get this to read 8/10 and we're good. And you got to be kind of careful snugging it because it will move. So there we are. We've got this shelf here set to 1 inch. So historically a metal planer was basically like the planer mills, the whole plane, the mill table would move and you'd have basically a J-shaped cutter that would just plane metal off. They were common before shapers and horizontal mills were a thing. So this is for setting height on that. You can use them for other things, obviously. Use them for inspection and other things. Because say, you know, in a shop, I don't have a lot of gauge blocks. So if I need 2 stacks of the same height, that's not an option for me. So I'll use this as my second stack instead of having 2 separate stacks. I actually have a really early set of round Hoke type gauges that predate this style by about probably 50 years, 60 years. Very old set of gauges. They're cool. Well, I hope this gets you guys started on a few different methods of inspection. And, you know, I have my baby surface check plate here, which is a good example of, excuse me while I rearrange the camera. This is a good example of an extremely rigid indicator stand where I have to push hard to flex this. Where for very high precision work, I'll use this. Or for quick and dirty work. Ironically, the stuff in the middle tends to go on the regular surface plate. I have it set up with this 0.5 of an inch indicator with fairly limited travel. This doesn't have a fine adjust on it. Eventually, I think I will make an arm that does have fine adjust. Stefan Gertesvinter has a really good surface gauge indicator stand series, which I'm a huge fan of. Obviously, I'm plugging him. And this style of indicator has so much preload and such a heavy arm that once I snug this down, you actually rock the plate before you move the arm, which is really impressive. And also great because this is a heavily sprung indicator compared to a more modern Mitutoyo, which I prefer to use for most work. You see how light that spring pressure is. You know, there's a lot of different stands. And this is just, I think, the goal here was to make this accessible and showing people how you don't need a lot of tools and how you can use a 1, 2, 3 block. Like, ideally you do inspect them, but you can trust even the cheap ones of these to be within 0.5 on all dimensions and all perpendicularity and parallelism and all that. You know, parallelism's pretty easy to check. We'll just show you quick. You just sweep the indicator and your variation from end to end is how far out of parallel you are. So you see the indicator's barely hopping around. We've got, our reading is 11/10,000ths. to 1/10,000. So like we're within 1/10,000th of an inch of parallel, which is fantastic. And that's really good for almost any setup, unless you're on a grinder. But if you're on a grinder, you're probably not using $20 sets of 1, 2, 3 blocks. And I like that even these cheap ones have threaded holes. Unfortunately, these are metric. They're not 5/16 18. And my other 1, 2, 3 blocks are 5/16 18. So it's a little annoying. And not the end of the world. That you make it work. The clearance holes in this work fine for 5/16 18. So, live and learn. The nice 1, 2, 3 blocks I don't think are worth buying, because if you're like me, you will eventually blunder your way into these with a cutter. And I tend to grind my own if I need inspection fixtures, or look to suppliers like Suburban Tool. And thanks for watching, guys. This is basically just a 20-minute ramble on inspection and a few different methods, and showing you an overview of the tools. If anyone's interested, I'm always happy to take advice. Inspection is one of those things that I think gets overlooked for hobbyists, because it's really fun to make things, but how do you know if you're actually making something good if you don't inspect it? And it is important, in my opinion, to push your skills and try and make yourself better as a machinist, because a lot of these skills and the ability and willingness to look at your own mistakes, find them, and address them, I find are really valuable in other aspects of my life. I think as a person, I've developed a little bit more humility and willingness to admit when I'm wrong, because this isn't going to lie to me like I lie to myself. Once we have a good standard, we know an inch is an inch. Just because I think it should be an inch doesn't mean it's going to be an inch. And being able to admit to yourself that you might have made a mistake is very important. So thanks for watching, guys. I hope you had fun with this video. I certainly did. And, thanks again. The channel growth here, I just want to say thank you once more. It's really been fantastic. And at time of recording, I've picked up like 12 subscribers in a couple of days, which feels amazing. For those of you who don't know, again, thanks for watching. I try to record. The videos are getting posted about 2 weeks after they're shot and edited. And I want to do that just in case I ever decide to take a vacation from posting and get back into it, just because I want to have the steady stream of content. I think it's important to watchers, and we try to break it up a little bit. I did some milling machine videos. I think I'm spoiling the next series. What I would like to do is scrape in a master square made out of an old cast iron window weight. Unfortunately, I did actually lose the footage of what still looked like a window weight, but the idea is still there. I'm just basically milling two faces square, and we'll go from there once I have two parallel faces, because it's easier to hold on to in a vise. I'm going to pick up the camera and swing you over. It is in the vise now. And you'll see I just have two lead slugs in here. Literal bullets, actually, because they were handy. And those deform and take up, because this isn't square. It's got some weird tapers, so now these are deformed unevenly, so I still have good pressure on it, so it holds in the vise. So thanks for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed and found this informative. And I think that's really it for today, even though we got sidetracked. Thanks again, guys.